They laughed when Earth launched its first fleet, mocked our tech, our courage, our very existence. Then that same fleet erased the star system without losing a single ship. Now the galaxy doesn't laugh. It listens. It obeys. Subscribe for more jaw-dropping tales where humanity stops asking for respect and starts commanding it. They called it a joke before it even left the docks. Across the galaxy, the images of Earth's first spacefaring fleet were passed around with laughter. Meme feeds and holovids from 1,000 alien worlds ridiculed the patchwork vessels. A mining ship retrofitted with cannons. A cargo freighter retooled as a command vessel. Hulls looked like they'd been stitched together with desperation and scrap. From the Virex homeworld to the far cry of the Solari Nebula, one phrase echoed. Primitive. Predictable. Pathetic. And humanity heard every word. Not all mockery came from malice. Some aliens genuinely couldn't comprehend why Earth was even attempting this. In a galaxy built on millennia of war, conquest, and hypertech, what did a backwater species with just one blue planet expect to accomplish? They hadn't even colonized a second star system. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. Their fleet was a mismatched pile of half-functioning prototypes. So they laughed. But humanity had heard laughter before. Admiral Reyna Thorne stood silent on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the stars drift past with cold precision in her eyes. The ship was old, cobbled together from what Earth could afford. She didn't care. She remembered how Earth had always been underestimated. The same way early humans were underestimated on their own world, until they tamed fire, shaped steel, and split the atom. She remembered the food riots when Earth was first denied access to the galactic trade network. The Council had offered peace, only to isolate humanity economically once they refused to surrender political control. She remembered seeing Earth's cities dim their lights to conserve power, factories repurposed to build not comfort, but armor. Children raised on blackout drills and anti-radiation pills. Every joke told about Earth's fleet ignored what it had cost. The first fleet wasn't just ships. It was survival forged in orbit. It was necessity turned into resolve. Every world in the galaxy had evolved under the safety of knowing their place in the galactic order. Humanity was not granted that luxury. From the moment they made contact, they were told to comply or collapse. And when Earth refused, the Council didn't send diplomats, they sent guidelines. What tech humanity could access. What systems they were forbidden to enter. What alliances they could never join. In theory, Earth was part of the galactic community. In reality, they were the janitors of a gilded palace, kept useful but never invited to sit at the table. And so Earth adapted. Not with advanced nanotech or exotic antimatter cores, but with fierce determination, brutal efficiency, and sleepless nights. Human engineers learned how to rewire alien salvage. Pilots trained in zero-G simulators built in underground bunkers. Entire nations dissolved to fund the fleet initiative. The last global war hadn't ended with peace, it ended with unity, because Earth had realized it wasn't alone. The first fleet wasn't pretty. It wasn't symmetrical. But it was armed, crewed, and ready. When the launch date arrived, 100,000 people stood in silence as the ships lifted from Earth's crust into the black. No fanfare. No fireworks. Just cold, grinding thrusters and the sound of humanity's hopes breaking orbit. Onlookers didn't cheer, they held their breath. Because every soul on that fleet was someone's child, and everyone knew what failure would mean. The world watched the ships disappear into the sky. Earth's leaders sent a final message to the galaxy. We are ready to participate in the stars. We ask only for respect. No reply came. But 1,000 alien streams played mocking commentary in real time. This is their best? They sent flying dumpsters into a war zone. They'll break apart on entry. Maybe they'll crash into a moon and do us a favor. But no one aboard the fleet was laughing. Not Lieutenant Arya Kim, the engineer who had once repaired Earth's orbital elevator with parts from a washing machine. Not Sergeant Maddox, who trained entire squads in vacuum combat using duct tape and determination. Not Commander Elric, who once salvaged a functioning shield generator from a derelict alien scout ship with nothing but manual tools. And certainly not Admiral Thorne, who had buried her own son after a border skirmish sparked by a council navigation accident. The crew knew exactly what they represented. Not just a planet, but the message that humanity would not sit quietly at the edge of the galaxy. They would show up, even if they had to drag themselves into the stars with bleeding hands. This wasn't an invitation. It was a declaration. The galaxy thought humanity was stupid to launch ships made from refitted haulers and rusted hulls. They were wrong. Because those ships weren't built for glory. They were built to survive. They were built to adapt. And above all, they were built to fight. The first fleet wasn't elegant. It didn't glide. It howled. And behind that howl was a history of a species that had clawed through ice ages, pandemics, world wars, and extinction-level threats, just to be mocked at the finish line. So be it. Humanity had been mocked before. But history doesn't remember the first ones to laugh. It remembers the last ones to stand. And as the first fleet disappeared into the void, Earth's skies darkened behind them. The mockery would continue, for now. But one day, the galaxy would learn. And when it did, it wouldn't be laughter echoing across the stars. It would be silence. And fear. The Galactic Council chamber shimmered with light refracted through crystal data pillars, a monument to millennia of order. The chamber wasn't built for debate, it was built for authority. Every race that sat on the council considered itself superior by virtue of time, technology, or legacy. And they all agreed on one thing: humans did not belong among them. They were too young, too volatile, too unrefined. The motion on today's docket was simple: determine Earth's eligibility for permanent recognition. Not trade. Not territory. Recognition. A symbolic gesture to acknowledge a planet that had clawed its way into orbit using obsolete tools and ambition. But the Council wasn't interested in symbols. High Chancellor Vayrek of the Virex species opened the session with clipped disdain. Earth has launched what it calls a fleet. The ships are underarmed, undershielded, and by our standards, underevolved. Laughter echoed across the chamber. The Solari delegate, composed of living plasma, pulsed in a dismissive wave. Why are we discussing primates with rockets? If they want to pretend, let them. They can't harm us. The Zor ambassador spoke next, biological augmentations twitching with barely hidden contempt. They refuse genetic compliance. They reject neural protocol sharing. They're dangerous because they think individually. That alone disqualifies them. No one objected. Earth had no allies here. Behind closed doors, the discussion was darker. Some factions considered humanity useful, as a warning, a distraction, or even as cannon fodder. The Virex proposed a joint military exercise, masking it as a welcoming ceremony. A mock battle in a forgotten system, with multiple council ships overseeing Earth's trial. A chance to test their capability, they said. What they meant was, humiliate them. Provoke them. Push them back into their hole. The vote passed unanimously. The location was chosen carefully, Harkon 7, a dead system stripped bare by centuries of resource extraction. No civilians. No risks. Just enough radio static to interfere with long-range scans and mask what was really happening. Earth received the invitation days later. The message was polite, decorated with diplomatic flattery, and signed by every major council race. The words sounded welcoming. But Admiral Reyna Thorne saw through it immediately. She read the data 3 times, then once more in silence. The coordinates were too isolated. The escort ratio too high. And the word simulation was repeated often enough to feel like a warning. Her fingers tightened around the armrest of her command chair. They're not testing us. They're trying to break us. Command staff reviewed the mission details. On paper, the Council promised a mock combat drill, rules of engagement, and safety overrides. But Earth's intelligence divisions had intercepted chatter hinting at a more aggressive tone. No proof. No admission. Just patterns. Thorne had dealt with patterns before. During Earth's first failed negotiation, a similar tone was used, right before Council patrols, accidentally, destroyed a Martian supply convoy. When questioned, the Council blamed malfunctioning translation arrays. No reparations. No apology. Now they were staging a friendly trial, deep in dead space, with no observers and full weapon authorizations. The First Fleet prepared for the exercise anyway. If Earth pulled out, they'd appear afraid. If they attacked first, they'd be the aggressors. The only way forward was to walk into the trap with eyes open. Thorne called a closed ship briefing. We're being watched. Judged. And if we fall, no one will come for us. This is not training. This is survival. We either prove our place out there, or give them reason to wipe us out entirely. The officers didn't blink. They'd known this was coming. Commander Elric ran recalibrations on every ship's system, squeezing out fractions of efficiency from hardware not designed for combat. Lieutenant Arya Kim worked on resonance tuning, boosting shield response times using recycled power cycles. Sergeant Maddox doubled boarding drills and close-quarters simulation. Earth wasn't going to show up polished. They were going to show up dangerous. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Council fleet commanders received their real orders. Grand Marshal Kevern of the Virex Navy was tasked with leading the exercise. His instructions were clear. Escalate the simulation until humanity reacts. Measure their capabilities. Document weaknesses. Do not allow them to leave with pride. He didn't protest. He saw humans the same way the Council did, a threat to the order, to the hierarchy. Letting them into galactic society would be like giving a blade to a child. Better to break them now, while they were still soft. Kevern's fleet deployed early. Their ships glided into Harkon 7 with gleaming armor, weapon arrays tuned to perfection, and backup jammers ready to scramble Earth's communications if needed. They positioned themselves in a formation that looked routine, but was built to isolate, corner, and destroy. Thorne noticed immediately. They're not hiding it well, she said, watching telemetry as her fleet approached the rendezvous point. They think we're stupid. She wasn't angry. She was focused. The First Fleet had one advantage. Not tech. Not numbers. But mindset. Every officer, every crew member, knew this might be their last flight. That certainty sharpened them. Made them lethal. She transmitted a silent order to all ships. Go dark. Engage comm discipline. Prepare countermeasures. If the Council wanted to test them, they'd get their answer. In the quiet hum of the command deck, Admiral Thorne whispered to herself, more conviction than hope. Let them laugh. They won't be laughing much longer. The trap had been set. But Earth wasn't walking into it blind. They were walking in ready to burn it down. The fleet was a patchwork of desperation given form. Where other species built ships from forged alloys and automated skyyards, Earth had welded together survival. There were no elegant curves or radiant cores. Just plates bolted over trauma. Scars visible in the steel. Every ship had a soul, and a cost. The Defiance was the oldest. Once a Mars to Europa cargo hauler, now a frontline command ship reinforced with stripped-down tank armor. Its engines coughed when pushed, but its fire control systems were custom-coded by engineers who had grown up watching their cities crumble under energy rationing. Every cannon had been repurposed. Every panel hand installed. The Ashes had been a rescue vessel once. Now it bristled with railguns built from asteroid drills and missile tubes repurposed from intercontinental launch platforms. Its shield array was unstable. Arya Kim's latest software patch had stabilized it for now, but only just. Arya never rested. Youngest officer in the fleet. Her bunk was littered with sleep-deprived calculations, simulation readouts, and neural mesh chips repurposed from abandoned mining rigs. She had taught herself quantum harmonics from pre-contact textbooks and learned shield tuning by trial, error, and surviving near-death feedback burns. She didn't need sleek consoles or synthetic AI assistance. She needed duct tape, raw code, and a fireproof jacket. Then there was Union's Edge, a former diplomatic cruiser turned spearhead. Its sleek body had been scarred, stripped of all luxury, and retrofitted with launch bays. Sergeant Maddox led the boarding crews stationed there. Ex-Special Forces, he'd been forged during Earth's last civil war. His squad trained in Nulgi combat using knives, EMP grenades, and muscle memory. Council species trained for elegant distance warfare. Humans had prepared for the moment everything went to hell up close. Maddox didn't give speeches. He trained until men puked, then trained them more. His motto wasn't in the handbook. Breach first. Ask questions after the last shot. Commander Elric was the fleet's technical brute. Born on a Saturn refinery station, he'd been dismantling and rebuilding machines since age 6. He was the one who figured out how to retrofit alien reactor shielding using rebar and melted copper. He called the fleet's systems ugly genius. Not elegant, but brutally functional. The fleet was staffed by people like him. No uniforms with gold trim. No ceremonial protocols. Just patched-in life support, wire-strewn cockpits, and an endless drive to make things work, because failure meant extinction. The Council couldn't understand it. They saw the ships and laughed. They didn't see the crews who knew every cable by feel. Who slept beside their fusion cores. Who had trained not for show, but for survival in the worst-case scenario. Every system aboard a human ship had at least 3 backups, all of them improvised. Redundancy was the culture. Every crew member could fix what broke, even if it wasn't their job. Every station doubled as a combat post. In Earth's first fleet, everyone was either a fighter or dead weight. There was no dead weight. The fleet's AI wasn't sleek or sapient. It was a hybrid neural cluster designed to be forgetful, intentionally, so it couldn't be hijacked. A paranoia born from early Council hacking attempts. Arya had engineered the code to be stubborn, decentralized, and constantly mutating. It wasn't graceful. It was hostile. Even Earth's own tech teams sometimes struggled to interface with it. That was the point. The human fleet wasn't optimized for diplomacy. It wasn't built to escort. It wasn't built to impress. It was built to resist annihilation. Each ship bore markings not of heritage, but of hardship. The Defiant still carried dents from the Spaceyard riots during its launch. Ashes had a scorched hull section where the original prototype fusion chamber had imploded. Union's Edge had welding seams still visible from the midnight rebuilds after the Jovian sabotage incident. The names weren't ceremonial. They were promises. Defiance. Ashes. Union's Edge. Reckoner. Every name told the Council one truth. Humanity remembered. And it would not forget. Admiral Thorne walked the fleet's data chain daily, checking status updates not from officers but directly from repair crews. She knew the repair schedules better than the logistics staff. She could quote the heat tolerance of every reused alloy. She didn't wear medals. She wore burn scars, some recent. Every leader in the First Fleet had bled for it, sometimes literally. Every recruit had volunteered knowing they might never return. When Earth called for its first space fleet, no one had to be conscripted. The sign-up lists crashed the servers. Not out of patriotism, but because humans understood what it meant to be laughed at. Marginalized. Threatened. This wasn't just about proving themselves. It was about survival. Every Earth nation had finally united under that brutal realization. If they failed in space, there would be no second attempt. There would be no mercy. So they sent their best, not their richest, not their most polished, but their most resilient. People who could hold a hull breach shut with a wrench and a prayer. As they approached Harkon 7, communications remained quiet. The fleet drifted into position, every eye watching, every system humming with tension. They had been underestimated. But humans had always been underestimated. And every time, history had regretted it. This time would be no different. They hadn't come to impress. They'd come to outlast. And if necessary, they'd come to destroy. The fleet entered the Harkon 7 system with every sensor on high alert. There were no greetings. No acknowledgements. Just data pings from Council vessels already in orbit, positioned in formation that didn't match a training exercise. Earth's captains noted the placements: widespread, flanking arcs, overlapping fields of fire. This wasn't orientation. It was encirclement. Admiral Thorne saw the pattern within seconds. The so-called joint operation looked like a noose. She gave no order yet. Every human ship drifted into the designated zone, maintaining tight formations, weapons offline, but fingers hovered near triggers. The Council fleet dwarfed them in size and sophistication. Sleek vessels, smooth energy curves, signal disciplines so tight even Earth's best scanners struggled to pin down armament loadouts. The humans were underdogs in every sense. But they weren't blind. A sudden transmission cut through the silence. Marshal Keverin's voice, measured, polite, and unmistakably smug, welcomed the participants from Earth, and outlined the exercise. Simulated assault. Live tracking. Non-lethal settings. Coordinated drills. He thanked Earth for its willingness to grow. It was all a script. The kind that sounded peaceful but was written with a knife behind the back. The signal ended. 5 seconds later, targeting locks lit up across Earth's fleet. Not passive scans, active. Hostile. Confirmed. Thorne didn't wait. Combat protocols. All ships, execute contingency red. The trap was sprung, but Earth was already moving. Shields came online. Weapons powered. Evasive vectors initiated. The fleet split into scattered spirals, forcing Council vessels to spread fire. Then came the first strike. A Solari corvette, falsely flagged for simulation, opened fire with a real plasma bolt. It punched through Ash's lower hull, slicing through 2 decks. 17 dead instantly. Hull breach sealed in 6 seconds. No time to mourn. The second volley came from the flank. A Virex cruiser unleashed a tri-beam lance across space, aiming for the Defiance. But Arya had just rerouted auxiliary heat from the reactor into the shield buffers, overcharging them beyond spec. The impact flared but held. Human ships fired back. No warnings. No calibration. Rio rounds. Railgun shells accelerated to ship-piercing velocity, slamming into Council armor. Their shields flickered, designed for energy, not kinetics. One cruiser's outer array shorted, exposing a vulnerable drive pod. Sergeant Maddox's team launched. Boarding pods detached from Union's edge, silent and dark. Stealth-coated, magnetic-anchored, manually piloted. No AI trail. 4 pods reached the nearest Zord destroyer. Breach charges ignited. Inside, the Council crew didn't even know how to react. They trained for fleet combat, not corridor warfare. Maddox's soldiers cut through them with ruthless precision. Blades where bullets jammed. Flash bangs to blind photoreceptors. One soldier died clearing a control node. The other seized the ship's reactor command and triggered emergency overrides. 30 seconds later, the destroyer lost helm control. Earth rerouted it into another enemy frigate at full thrust. The collision took both out. Council command was still operating under protocol assumptions. Their AI flagged Earth's aggression as an anomaly. Their systems still believed this was a drill gone wrong. It wasn't. It had never been. Humanity had expected treachery. This wasn't panic. It was counter-assault. Commander Elric rotated the Reckoner, a smaller gunship, lightly armored but nimble, through a blind spot in the enemy formation. He aimed for the exposed flank of a Virex battlecruiser. Targeting relays synced with the Defiance. Fire linked. Coordinated strikes hit power junctions in sequence. The ship didn't explode, it just went dark. Silent. Dead. Thorne transmitted one message across all open bands. You fired first. We finished this. The Council fleet began to understand. Humanity wasn't broken. It was enraged. Every strike met a response. Every loss became a lesson mid-battle. The First Fleet fought like a living organism, adjusting, shifting, adapting faster than their enemies could compute. 4 Earth ships were gone now. One vanished in an antimatter burst when its containment failed under fire. Another vented atmosphere until it was just a drifting hulk. But 7 remained, and each was learning. The enemy tried to disengage. Council protocol dictated retreat once simulated operations breached threshold, but this wasn't a simulation. They were bleeding, and Earth wasn't stopping. Human boarding teams swarmed the remaining Council destroyers. Data cores were ripped, sensor arrays stolen. Arya initiated a feedback loop on one of the Zor's own tracking systems, causing it to target its allies. In under 20 minutes, the balance shifted. The mock battle had become a real war. Marshal Kevrin issued a command to cease fire. He claimed it was all a miscommunication. A misfire. A calibration glitch. Thorne ignored him. She relayed live footage of the burning wreckage of Earth's lost ships to the Council fleet. Then she gave the order. No quarter. The next wave of human attacks came not from the front, but from beneath sensor range. Plasma torches. Slug drones. Data spike warheads that overloaded enemy targeting suites. Earth didn't fight fair. They fought to win. By the end of the hour, the Council forces began retreating from the system. Not one Earth ship pursued. The First Fleet held its position, scarred, bloodied, burning in places, but intact. Still standing. Earth had walked into a trap and refused to die. The Council had tried to shame them. They had, instead, exposed their own cowardice. And the galaxy was watching. The Council commanders regrouped, expecting a retreat. That was the protocol. Weaker fleets withdrew. Damaged forces negotiated. But Earth's First Fleet didn't run. It fractured deliberately, breaking formation into unpredictable vectors, making it impossible to pin down a single coordinated target. Council systems stuttered. Their algorithms were trained on thousands of past battles. None of them looked like this. The Defiance accelerated directly toward the densest enemy cluster, drawing fire, absorbing hits through flickering shields while 3 smaller ships slipped beneath the enemy's sensory horizon. The Reckoner dove into the electromagnetic shadows left by Council plasma fire, using their own attack trails as cover. No alien commander had ever seen that done. No alien engineer would have tried it. Too dangerous. Too chaotic. Too human. A Virex dreadnought targeted the Union's edge. Unaware Maddox had already deployed 6 stealth boarding pods. They hit the hull at low velocity, gliding like shadows, attaching silently to the underbelly. Manual breach tools cut through composite layers. The boarding party split inside the ship, moving with practiced precision, disabling crew quarters, sabotaging control nodes, and planting anti-personnel mines in key junctions. One pod's team was intercepted by a Zor security unit, 10-foot-tall cybernetic hybrids, armed with reflex pulse rifles. The humans didn't break formation. They dropped smoke, deployed sound disruptors, and advanced through chaos. Maddox led the charge, knife in hand, slicing through artificial tendon and armor with pure force and precision. The Zor were stronger. They weren't faster. The entire ship was taken from the inside in under 12 minutes. Meanwhile, Commander Elric fired the Reckoner's main drill gun. The Council hadn't even classified it as a threat. It wasn't designed as a weapon until Elric repurposed it. The projectile wasn't explosive. It was dense, silent, and fast enough to punch through the magnetic shielding of a Solari battleship's power core. The result wasn't a blast. It was an implosion. The ship folded inward, crushed under its own containment failure. Panic rippled through the Council fleet. They had never fought an enemy like this. Not because of strength. Not because of technology. But because humanity refused to follow the script. Council command structures started fragmenting. Subcommanders issued contradicting orders. Withdraw, hold, re-engage, cease fire. The humans ignored it all. Lieutenant Arya Kim remotely triggered shield pulse feedback on one of their compromised ships. The alien systems hadn't been designed for looping overloads. The internal capacitors exploded in sequence, creating a shockwave that disrupted 5 nearby vessels. She had spent her childhood coding backdoors into black market hardware. That experience now tore holes in Council electronics with code no alien had ever seen. The Ashes launched kinetic dispersal rounds at high arcs, projectiles with no guidance, no tech, just solid steel accelerated to insane speeds. They weren't meant to hit directly. They were meant to shatter shields and sensor arrays from raw impact alone. Space around the Council ships became a storm of unpredictable shrapnel. The First Fleet made every shot count. No energy to waste. No redundancy. Every move was intentional, brutal, and outside the enemy's understanding. The Council's pride turned to fear. They tried to regroup near a central defense line, relying on overlapping turrets and shared shield networks. But Thorn anticipated it. She authorized a maneuver Earth had never tested in live combat, synced gravity flares using twin fusion overburns to distort the field around the enemy. It wasn't perfect. 2 human ships collapsed under the gravitational stress. One snapped in half. But the effect distorted space just enough to shift the Council's entire formation off course, causing collisions between vessels that weren't prepared to recalculate fast enough. Earth had accepted the cost. They always did. Another boarding crew activated hull cutters on a disabled frigate. Council crew attempted to surrender. Maddox marked the location for evacuation but continued forward. No guarantees. No pauses. The mission was survival, not diplomacy. Thorn refused to answer incoming hails. The Council finally realized they weren't dealing with an emerging power. They were dealing with a predator. The humans hadn't come to play a role. They had come to rewrite the rules. One Council vessel broke protocol and attempted to escape using hyperspace drives. Arya detected the power signature and rerouted targeting from 3 Earth ships to triangulate a focused railgun strike on the drive chamber mid-charge. It didn't just stop the ship. It detonated the core before the jump could stabilize. The resulting distortion tore open a micro-rift, dragging nearby vessels into radiation spikes and causing critical system failures across 6 ships. The galaxy had expected Earth to show restraint, to seek approval. Instead, they got a demonstration. In less than an hour, over a third of the Council task force had been rendered non-operational. 9 ships destroyed, 5 captured, 2 disabled beyond repair. Earth had lost 5 ships, nearly half its force, but the remainder were still fighting. And worse, learning. Each second of combat was recorded, analyzed, adjusted. New tactics emerged mid-battle. Communications moved through encrypted short-burst code sequences no alien could intercept. They weren't just fighting like soldiers. They were evolving like organisms under pressure. No backup was coming. The Council hadn't expected to need reinforcements. They believed one show of force would be enough to put humanity in its place. Instead, they triggered something they didn't understand. The humans didn't come to prove themselves. They came to break expectations. And they were just getting started. The Council's fleet had fractured. What began as posturing had devolved into chaos. Command chains collapsed under the weight of human unpredictability. What made it worse, they couldn't see it coming. Humanity wasn't deploying known doctrines. They weren't even following internal patterns. Each captain operated semi-independently, tied only by shared objectives and encrypted burst packets. They moved like a decentralized swarm with purpose, not like a navy. Council analysts scrambled, deploying last resort heuristics, trying to categorize human tactics. Nothing held. Every algorithm failed. Human behavior broke models faster than they could update them. That wasn't innovation. That was adaptation weaponized. The Union's Edge redirected its systems for long-range jamming. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Communications between alien vessels sputtered. Tight beam relays failed. Fleet coordination dropped below combat minimums. Without real-time targeting sync, their superior firepower turned into isolated salvos, many missing entirely or slamming into friendly vessels. The humans exploited it instantly. They attacked the Council from inside its own formation. Ships didn't just engage, they slipped through hull gaps, darted beneath defensive arcs, and fired point-blank. Each Earth vessel moved like a knife, sliding in, cutting deep, and vanishing before return fire could lock on. They weren't large enough to match firepower, so they didn't try. They struck with brutal precision, targeting engines, cores, and bridge nodes, leaving husks behind. Then came the electronic warfare. Lieutenant Arya Kim had uploaded intrusion worms into the ships they'd already damaged. These weren't viruses. They were behavior-mimicking AI fragments. They impersonated Council command routines, silently issuing false orders, reversing navigation cues, draining shield banks mid-battle. It wasn't sabotage. It was subversion. One Solari cruiser rotated to fire on an Earth corvette, then veered 90 degrees and blasted a friendly gunship clean out of the stars. Its crew never had time to ask why. Council survivors tried to regroup around their dreadnought, the Zarthan's Wrath. Massive, ancient, covered in layered shielding and redundant systems, it was the fallback command post, believed indestructible. Maddox saw it differently. He relayed a brief. It bled heat faster than other ships. That meant a massive energy load, which meant it was vulnerable to cascade disruption. Thorne approved his strike. 3 Earth ships coordinated an overclock discharge, simultaneous EM bursts tuned to scramble the Wrath's shielding harmonics. Then, without waiting, the Ashes fired its heaviest projectile into the momentary opening. It wasn't about destroying the ship. It was about hitting the main energy relay junction. The Zarthan's Wrath didn't explode. It darkened. All lights died. Its engines powered down. The ship began drifting, massive, lifeless, and terrifying. For the first time in recorded Council history, a flagship was disabled by what they considered a primitive race. Council morale collapsed. The rest of the fleet scattered. Maddox transmitted a final warning in broken Council standard. Leave. Or be next. No return fire came. Only silence. Across the human fleet, damage reports streamed in. Nearly 40% of systems were running on backup. Crew losses were rising. Power levels were critical on at least 2 ships. But the enemy had retreated. Not negotiated. Not surrendered. Fled. That was a first. And Earth would remember it. Thorne kept her voice steady, even as blood dried on her collar. We hold position. No pursuit. Let them carry the story back. They didn't need to chase victory. They'd already won the narrative. Across Council space, the news spread like plasma fire. The youngest species in the Council had crippled an elder fleet using half the ships, outdated weapons, and suicidal tactics. More damning, they'd done it without any formal declaration, any diplomatic pretense, or interest in appeasement. Council's security doctrine was exposed as hollow. Their simulations, assumptions, strategic dominance, all reduced to ash in a single confrontation. The humans hadn't followed their rules. They'd created their own. On Earth, the news was delayed by hours. And when it arrived, it didn't come with celebration. It came with names. The dead. The missing. The lost. Civilians saw the cost before they saw the glory. And yet, no one protested. No one panicked. Humanity had been underestimated before. But now they knew they didn't need numbers, or scale, or even parity. They only needed a reason. The First Fleet's actions weren't just a counterstrike. They were a warning. Earth didn't seek conquest. But if provoked, it would burn through any opposition with cold precision. It didn't matter how many planets the Council had. What mattered was that humanity had learned. They had seen the structure of power. And they knew how to break it. A Council summit was called within days. Emergency session. Quiet panic behind formal robes. Questions were raised the galaxy hadn't asked in millennia. Could Earth be contained? Should sanctions be issued? Could another species be deployed to intervene? But they all knew the truth. No other species fought like them. No other species would dare to try. A single delegate, a ET, known for caution, summed it up. We mocked them because they were new. We assumed they would beg for inclusion. Instead, they made us irrelevant. No one spoke in reply. Back on the edge of the engagement zone, Thorne issued a final set of instructions. The First Fleet would not advance. It would not colonize. It would not claim territory. They would return home. and leave the ruins behind as a monument. Not to Earth's power, but to the cost of provoking it. The stars wouldn't forget. And neither would the Council. The Council's retreat fractured galactic balance. What once held as unshakable authority now teetered under the weight of fear. Entire systems that had bowed to the Council without question began reevaluating their loyalties. If Earth, untested, unsanctioned, unblessed, could shatter a star system's defense in a single battle, what else were they capable of? And worse, what else were they willing to do? No more jokes were made about humanity's rusting ships. No memes circulated about their laughable military. Instead, covert meetings were held in backrooms across dozens of worlds. The laughter had been replaced by dread. The unknown had a new name, and it was human. Earth, however, did not capitalize on the chaos. The First Fleet returned through silent slipstream lanes, leaving behind a trail of inactive satellites and broken systems. They transmitted no declarations, claimed no spoils. No planets were annexed, no new flags planted. The silence was deliberate. It wasn't absence. It was dominance without needing to declare it. On Earth, there were no parades. No banners lined cities. The footage, now declassified in parts, spread not through state media but in broken fragments, combat cams, black box recordings, audio logs from dying crew. It wasn't propaganda. It was truth. And it landed harder than any patriotic anthem could. The cost of victory was painted in faces. Captain Thorne stood before the assembly 2 days later, still wearing a cracked combat brace, refusing media handlers. She spoke calmly, not for glory but for record. She listed the fallen first. By name. Then ship damage. Then systems offline. Then fuel calculations. Only then, finally, the results. Over a dozen Council capital ships disabled, 1 dreadnought permanently dark, 3 major fleets withdrawn. She didn't ask for applause. She asked for clarity. She said, "We are not ready for a galactic war. But if they bring one again, we will end it. Quickly." Her words echoed longer than any weapons fire. Other Earth commanders spoke privately to diplomats. They clarified the position. Humanity did not want conquest, territory, or tribute. It wanted respect. And peace. And it would not beg for either. The message spread in hushed tones. The planets that once looked to the Council now watched Earth. Minor species, previously silenced or economically shackled, began speaking louder. Trade unions paused payments. Fleet reserves failed to mobilize. Former loyalists began pulling back their ships, not in protest, but in quiet caution. If Earth had learned how to fight like this in decades, what might it learn in centuries? In the Council chambers, arguments turned into shouting. The Solari called for a second offensive. The Beruin demanded immediate ceasefires. The Eldritch Shar insisted on cultural containment. No plan survived scrutiny. Because all assumed Earth would follow precedent. It hadn't once. And no one knew what they'd do next. The human concept of strategic ambiguity, something long abandoned by the structured logic of the Council, was now being studied as doctrine. Earth's restraint terrified them more than its weapons. Meanwhile, Earth accelerated research. Engineers dissected alien wreckage without permission. Labs reverse-engineered Council tech that had taken centuries to perfect. Shipyards expanded. Not for war, but for preparation. The First Fleet had been a test, and it had passed. Now they built a second. Quietly. Efficiently. And this time, it wouldn't be experimental. Human military doctrine evolved in real time. Officers rewrote tactics based on the Council's reactions. War colleges taught asymmetric engagement based on First Fleet encounters. Simulation pods ran alien combat logic against new human patterns. Earth wasn't just catching up. It was surpassing. Council analysts tried to intercept this progress. They failed. Human code ran chaotic by design, decentralized by necessity. Their encryption keys mutated by exposure. One analyst likened it to fighting a storm that learned with every strike you made. Within weeks, Council economies began showing fractures. Private contracts with human firms increased. Aliens once banned from Earth trade quietly resumed shipments. Markets adapted to the fear. Weapons developers shifted focus toward counter-human tech. But even that felt like a losing battle. Because humans didn't operate predictably. And every countermeasure was already obsolete by the time it was deployed. A leak from the Char Enclave revealed what most feared to say aloud. Humanity was no longer a new species. It was a new era. And then, an anomaly occurred. A small planet, Naoris 4, previously under Council protection, announced its withdrawal. It declared neutrality and requested Earth's assistance with internal restructuring. Not occupation. Not control. Just presence. A symbolic anchor. The Council threatened sanctions. Earth sent medical ships and agricultural drones instead. No soldiers. No weapons. Just help. Naoris thrived within 2 months. 4 more colonies followed. It was the final fracture in perception. Earth didn't just win wars. It won peace. With each planet that reached out, the Council's grip loosened. Their authority, once unshakable, had become suggestion. Their threats, once law, now sounded hollow. They had mocked Earth for its inexperience, but in doing so, they had missed what truly made humans dangerous. They weren't just warriors. They were builders. Fixers. Improvisers. Survivors. And they remembered everything. In one sealed strategy meeting, a Solari admiral asked the room, "Why didn't they destroy the entire fleet when they had the chance?" No one answered. But the truth was simple. Because they didn't need to. Destruction wasn't the goal. Recognition was. And now they had it. The Council, for all its pride, all its arrogance, had forgotten a simple truth. Fear wasn't born from destruction. It was born from the knowledge that it could come again. And Earth had made it clear, they hadn't even started yet. News of Naoris IV's transformation reached even the deepest Council-controlled territories. A once struggling world had seen an agricultural and medical resurgence in mere weeks, not due to conquest, but because Earth had chosen to assist rather than dominate. No propaganda. No mandatory allegiance. Just results. And that made Earth more dangerous than ever. Because for all their power, the Council had never inspired loyalty. Only obedience. But Earth? It was building something else, something far more lasting. Trust. The shift wasn't sudden, but it was unstoppable. Species that had been locked under Council tariffs for generations quietly began negotiations with human corporations. Diplomatic envoys, once dismissed as novices, were now requested across multiple sectors. Entire economies slowly reoriented, no longer looking to the Council for trade, but to Earth for innovation, adaptability, and above all, respect. And humanity didn't send fleets to demand that respect. They just kept delivering results. For the first time in centuries, the Council found itself reacting instead of ruling. Its meeting chambers grew more desperate. The once calm elder species now snapped at each other. Strategic alliances fractured under pressure. The only thing uniting them was fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing control, fear of humans doing what the Council could never do, unify through voluntary cooperation. The Earth Diplomatic Corps began accelerating offers of partnership, not protection, not rule. They didn't ask for planetary pledges. They offered data sharing, medical improvements, clean energy conversions. And when Council envoys tried to disrupt the process with threats, Earth's only response was transparency. Every alien world saw the contrast in real time. One power offered endless regulations and punishments. The other offered open-source technology and help fixing broken infrastructure. It wasn't a war for territory anymore. It was a war for relevance. And the Council was losing. A breakthrough came when the Doran Confederacy, an independent trade bloc historically aligned with the Council, announced a strategic pause in all Council agreements. They did not declare allegiance to Earth, but they opened direct diplomatic talks. In public. On record. With zero shame. The Council called it treason. The galaxy called it evolution. On Earth, the First Fleet was not paraded. Instead, its officers were dispersed. Not discharged, reassigned. Some led think tanks on alien diplomacy. Others embedded into cooperative trade missions. A few returned to training new recruits, not for another war, but for the possibility of one. The idea was simple: power and used was still power known. And that reputation lingered. When Earth's Second Fleet launched its test run, no one dared intercept it. Not even the boldest pirate syndicates or rogue warlords. The fleet didn't need to fire a shot. Its mere existence rerouted trade lanes and forced security protocols across 8 star systems. No one knew what the new ships carried. That was the point. Earth never explained what they were building anymore. They didn't need to. Silence became doctrine. Not because they had nothing to say, but because the galaxy now filled in the blanks with worst-case scenarios. The Council made one last attempt to regain control. Operation Chainfire, a massive fleet maneuver designed to surround a neutral zone and establish hard containment lines. 17 capital ships, over 400 support craft, spread across a sector that had begun drifting toward Earth's influence. The operation was deployed without warning, without consent. It failed within 6 hours. Not because Earth attacked. Because every species within that sector cut their own ties to the Council the moment Chainfire began. Mining rigs stopped transmitting. Orbital stations shut down access codes. Ground forces refused deployment orders. The Council had forgotten the most dangerous lesson of all: you can't control people who've already decided to be free. Human diplomats arrived 3 days later, not in warships, but with legal teams and engineers. They helped the sector reorganize into independent governance councils. They offered no rulers. They offered no armies. Just tools. Templates. Support. Council leaders watched in disbelief. They had deployed force. Earth had deployed ideas. And ideas spread faster than fire. Internal Council documents began leaking. Classified files showing how much they had underestimated Earth. How they'd mocked their salvage-based tech strategy. How they'd ridiculed socially volatile species evolution. The files painted a picture of arrogance built over millennia. And now it was all unraveling, publicly. Former Council allies now looked back at their own governments with suspicion. If they were so wrong about Earth, what else had they lied about? Rebellions didn't begin with bombs. They began with doubt. And Earth had planted it without even trying. The most feared move came not from a weapon, but from a broadcast. A message sent on all frequencies. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. Humanity does not seek dominion. We seek balance. We do not fear you, but you should be very careful about giving us a reason to. It was short. Unpolished. Delivered in multiple alien languages with no flourish. But it became the most repeated message in galactic history. It was painted on cargo freighters. Translated into protest slogans. Taught in classrooms. Whispered by politicians too cautious to speak openly. No one had ever threatened the Council with such calm certainty. Because humanity wasn't posturing. They simply weren't afraid anymore. The species once mocked as chaotic, primitive, and reckless had become the fulcrum on which galactic power now tilted. Not by demand. Not by conquest. But by demonstration. Where the Council punished, Earth inspired. Where the Council restricted, Earth enabled. Where the Council enforced, Earth evolved. It was no longer a question of whether Earth belonged in the galactic order. It was a question of how long the old one could survive. And in backrooms across distant planets, a terrifying new conversation was beginning. Not about how to stop Earth, but how to survive alongside it. Because they now knew something they could never unlearn. Earth's First Fleet had been nothing more than a message. And they had heard it, loud and clear. The Council began to fracture, not from external attack, but from internal rot. The oldest members who had built their dominion on fear and bureaucracy now found their influence questioned by their own subordinates. The iron grip they once held was now slipping, not because of a superior enemy, but because the illusion of superiority had been broken. Earth never asked for war. But it had trained for it anyway. And that was the part that unnerved every species watching from the sidelines. Humanity had prepared its fleet, sharpened its edge, and revealed only the tip of the blade. They had never shown their full hand, yet that incomplete glimpse had been enough to shatter the myth of Council invincibility. The Council's propaganda engine tried to spin it. They labeled Earth's presence destabilizing, called their aid programs infiltration, accused them of subverting galactic peace. But none of it worked. The world's Earth had helped spoke louder than any false narrative. Entire populations publicly testified to the results they had seen: broken water systems fixed in days, diseases eradicated, orbital debris cleared. Earth didn't boast. It delivered. That was the terrifying part. There was no bravado. Only performance. In a desperate countermove, the Council reached out to ancient defense systems, remnants of the precursor era buried in forgotten systems. They activated dormant AI weaponry, hoping to restore their lost aura of supremacy with ancient machines no species had dared touch in millennia. It was a mistake. The AI systems had no allegiance. They had been built for one thing: escalation without restraint. And the moment they came online, they did not distinguish friend from foe. Council-controlled sectors began going dark, communications lost, ships destroyed without warning. In trying to reclaim their dominance, the Council had triggered their own reckoning. Earth, watching from a distance, issued a single warning across all frequencies. "Stand down your machines. We will not intervene unless provoked." But the AI swarms were not listening. A fleet of Earth vessels moved into position, not to attack, but to evacuate refugee species caught in the wake of the chaos. These weren't battleships. They were rescue cruisers, hospital carriers, civilian escorts. And yet, when the rogue AI systems attempted to intercept, they found themselves locked out of targeting systems, communications jammed, and internal commands overwritten. Earth had cracked the ancient code. They didn't just destroy the threat. They reprogrammed it. What the galaxy saw next would become legend. Massive precursor drones, once the terror of entire sectors, began guarding Earth's ships, protecting evacuation corridors, following human command signals. And without fanfare, Earth redeployed them not as weapons of destruction, but as shields. Entire worlds watched in awe as the machines that had once enforced death now escorted life. Council warlords scrambled for explanations. None came. Because the truth was simple: Earth had stopped fearing old powers and started mastering them. For the Council, it was the final straw. Allies defected. Sectors seceded. Even military commanders disobeyed orders. The central seat of power that had stood for over 7,000 years now sat hollow. The high chair was empty. No declaration. No ceremony. It simply ended. Humanity never celebrated. No banners. No monuments. Because they hadn't sought victory. They had sought truth. The truth that any system built on domination was doomed to collapse under its own weight. That force without purpose rots. That fear-based empires decay the moment someone shows a better way. And humanity had shown it. In the vacuum left by the Council, dozens of independent worlds began forming new coalitions. Not centered around Earth, but inspired by its principles. Shared technology. Mutual defense. Open dialogue. These weren't empires. They were networks, organic, flexible, and free. And Earth? It did not step in to lead. It simply offered to listen. Advisors. Scientists. Engineers. Cultural liaisons. Not commanders. Not rulers. Just humans showing up where they were invited, helping where they were asked, and leaving when their work was done. It was more terrifying than conquest. Because it worked. Species that had hated each other for centuries now found themselves working side by side, not because of Earth, but because Earth had shown them it was possible. The old war machines of the galaxy had nothing left to aim at. There were no more enemies. Only possibilities. The few council remnants who clung to their power watched helplessly as relevance slipped through their fingers. They had built fleets and walls and laws. Earth had built trust. And there was no weapon sharp enough to cut through that. In one final act of desperation, a rogue council commander broadcasted a public challenge, demanding Earth meet them in open battle, fleet against fleet, to settle dominance once and for all. Earth responded with silence. There was no reply. Because for humanity, the war had already ended. It had ended the moment the galaxy stopped laughing. The moment species began listening. The moment hope replaced hierarchy. The rogue commander launched anyway. He took his fleet into a neutral system, hoping to bait Earth into retaliation. But when he arrived, he found nothing. No humans. No fleets. Just a single message burned into the orbital station's comm loop. Humanity does not need to prove itself. We already did. You just weren't ready to believe it. He turned back. But no one followed him. He had become what the Council had always been, alone. Earth's first fleet, though long docked, remained fully operational. But it never launched again in aggression. It didn't need to. Its legacy had already achieved the one thing no other force in the galaxy had. It changed minds. It redefined strength. And it proved, irrevocably, that the most powerful weapon in the universe wasn't a gun, or a ship, or even a star-destroying blast. It was an idea. An idea backed by the one species crazy enough to believe in it, and disciplined enough to act on it. Humanity. Time passed, but the echoes of what humanity had done did not fade, they deepened. Not through myths or dramatized tales, but through practical shifts in how civilizations functioned. Across hundreds of systems, old power structures had been replaced with decentralized councils, transparent data-sharing protocols, and joint development hubs. None of it was Earth-mandated. It emerged because Earth had proven it worked. The first fleet, now docked in Earth's deep-orbit dry yards, became a symbol, not of might, but of restraint. It was still operational. Every weapon system maintained. Every AI network preserved. But not one missile had launched since the day the Council fell. And that restraint terrified former adversaries more than any planetary bombardment ever had. The species who once viewed humanity as a primitive footnote now sent envoys, not spies. Some came seeking trade, others guidance. A few came in apology. Humanity never gloated. It welcomed them all. Not as victors, but as equals. That humility resonated louder than all their demonstrations of force. Generations later, cadets in military academies would study the Earth model, not just for tactics, but for philosophy. Why did it work? Why didn't Earth take control when it had the chance? Why wasn't the galaxy a human empire? Because Earth didn't want subjects. It wanted partners. When Earth shared its findings from the reprogrammed precursor AI systems, it gave the data freely. No patents. No political conditions. Worlds that had barely developed fusion power now had access to advanced shielding, zero-lag communication relays, and quantum infrastructure. And yet, Earth never demanded loyalty. Just integrity. That broke the old rules of galactic power, and in doing so, rewrote the future. The only opposition that remained were isolated remnants, rogue admirals, war profiteers, and information hoarders who still clung to the belief that the old ways would return. They sabotaged humanitarian efforts. They hijacked communications. They launched misinformation campaigns trying to discredit Earth. But every time, they failed. Because the galaxy had seen too much. They had watched Earth save colonies in the path of solar flares by deploying faster-than-light evacuation platforms. They had watched humans restore dying planets by terraforming with ecological precision that baffled even ancient species. And they had seen humans walk away from conquered ground. No army that powerful had ever done that. One rebel faction attempted to steal Earth's weapon blueprints, hoping to replicate the first fleet and build a rival. But when they accessed the encrypted data vaults, all they found were mission logs, technical manuals on agriculture drones, and maintenance guides on medical AI systems. Earth didn't guard its weapons because it didn't believe in hoarding terror. It believed that anyone trying to copy its strength without its values would never understand the blueprint in the first place. Strength wasn't in the machines. It was in the purpose behind them. Eventually, a new galactic accord was proposed. Not by Earth, but by a collective of 26 species, many of whom had once feared or mocked humanity. It outlined a shared technological commons, ethical war protocols, and a council of equals. Earth was invited to lead. It declined. Instead, it offered to serve on rotation like anyone else. That refusal stunned the galaxy more than any orbital demonstration ever had. Earth's first fleet wasn't just a war asset anymore. It was a deterrent, a stabilizer, and a symbol. It was stationed in a neutral zone, under transparent supervision, with open telemetry streams visible to any world. Every missile count, energy reading, and fleet movement was public. There were no secrets. Transparency became Earth's sharpest weapon. Over time, Earth's original enemies faded, not in death, but in irrelevance. The cultures that had mocked its rise, that had wagered against its resilience, were now remembered as the last ones to adapt. Their arrogance had been buried under the weight of their own disbelief. The story of the first contact, the mocking broadcasts, the ridicule, became a case study in interstellar psychology. Historians replayed it as the last moment the galaxy misunderstood what Earth was. Not a threat. A turning point. When Earth launched its second fleet, not a war armada, but a fleet of mobile universities, exploration vessels, and terraforming labs, it did so with no escort. No weapons. No defenses. And yet, no one dared touch them. Because they understood now. Earth's strength was never in its ability to retaliate. It was in the certainty that it wouldn't need to. The fear had passed. What remained was respect. And curiosity. Young species modeled their education systems after Earth's interdisciplinary approach. Scientists learned from human failures as much as their successes. Diplomats quoted human proverbs, not because they were poetic, but because they worked. And every year, more species joined the accord, not because they were pressured, but because they wanted to belong to something bigger than themselves. Humanity had given them that option. Without conquest. Without colonization. Just with conviction. The last transmission from Earth's first fleet's flagship, still on display in orbit, was archived into the galactic memory core, preserved for all to hear. It wasn't a threat, nor a warning. Just a sentence. If we can build peace with weapons like these, imagine what we can build without them. That sentence became the mission statement of the next galactic age. Not the age of domination, but the age of direction. An age humanity had opened by being underestimated, disrespected, and mocked, until it showed what true power looked like. Not destruction. Discipline. Not empire. Example. Not force. Faith. Faith that if you give others a better way, they might just choose it. Even if it takes time. Even if they resist. Even if they mock you first. Because eventually, they stop laughing. And they start listening. And that is when everything changes. That is when humanity wins, without ever needing to raise a weapon again.